Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to ICAS's London episode event today with Alastair Campbell. It is a beautiful morning outside, and also what a great result with Scotland football last night. So a great morning to have this discussion. Well, I'm Jonny Jacobs, a chartered accountant, and it's a huge privilege to be your host today. And whilst one of my current roles is finance director at Starbucks in EMEA, I also place a huge emphasis on advocating for mental health or mental fitness. Having been surrounded by friends and family, and also had some of my own challenges growing up, I know all too well the challenges around mental ill health. And I've also seen the benefits of focusing on positive mental well-being. And with that in mind, it's a real privilege to be able to support the broader mental health agenda, both at Starbucks, where I work with colleagues as the wellbeing sponsor, but also outside as a trustee of the Mental Health Foundation. And here at ICAS, it's been a huge privilege working as the member lead for mental health or mental fitness, working alongside the wonderful Janice Hutchison, who is our programme lead here for the Mental Fitness and Business Pledge, and also working closely with the executive team there and the whole team at ICAS, amazing team. And you'll have seen in the CA Mag that wonderful read that you all read cover to cover, that we devoted May's edition to mental fitness. And this conversation is part of that wider plan to really normalise the subject of mental well-being. So as a reminder, we're here today for our London episode event, and it's designed specifically for ICAS members in the city. And this is an opportunity for you to hear from an inspirational speaker. That's not me, that's Alastair Campbell, and also to meet and network with other CAs. So really thank you for taking the time this morning. And you're part of a small exclusive group with us today. Feel free to post about it on social, use the hashtag #TheLondonEpisode. There's also a chat function. We would love to make this interactive, so please do bring in your questions. So now you're not here to listen to me, you're here to listen to our renowned mental health campaigner, communicator, writer and strategist, Alastair Campbell. And Alastair, I've got to know you recently over different forums, and you've been a real inspiration for me in my journey in exploring mental health, and I'm sure you'll continue to support others on the call today. And Alastair is best known for his role as former British Prime Minister Tony Blair's spokesman, press secretary, director of communications strategy, but also work addressing mental health both personally and as a public advocate. And this has been a real role over a lifetime. And in recent years, Alastair's become increasingly involved with mental health charities, causes, speaking about his own experience of depression and addiction. And as a former Mind Champion of the Year, he's also an ambassador for several other charities. And today, Alastair talks very openly about his experiences, and we'll hear an awful lot more. And then last week, Alastair, we met for coffee. It was at Starbucks, obviously, and we shared the importance of the role of accounting and finance professionals, and really the role that they can play in winning hearts and minds across this agenda. So over to Alastair to share a bit of a story, and then we'll come back in for the Q&A. Over to you.
By the way, John, I'm a little bit underexcited and underwhelmed about the football bit of this, because when we talk about mental health and well-being, for me, football is a massive part of it, and that is Burnley and Scotland. And Scotland last night were absolutely outstanding. And you remember when we did have our meeting the other day inevitably it was Starbucks, I was saying to you, this London episode, and I couldn't get my head around the fact that you're ICAS Scotland, and yet this is London. And I said, are these people like kind of Jose Mourinho? They're based outside Scotland, but they did their badges in Scotland. And you said, exactly, these are the Jose Mourinhos of the accounting world. So I'd like to say hello to all of you. You're all winners. And I want to start off with a few little adverts. The first is, when we talk about mental health and well-being in a busy hub like London, go on when you get half an hour later in the day or any time in the future, go on to project Festival of Discovery. And I've done an interview there about nature and about, it's set in Hampstead. It's just me talking about Hampstead Heath, okay? But I tell you, one of the first things to say, one of the best things about living in London and Glasgow and Edinburgh and Birmingham and Liverpool and Manchester and Newcastle, all the big cities in Britain, although they're very, very kind of urban, we are blessed with the green spaces that we have, and long may that continue. So the Heath, I live about 100 yards from the Heath. I've got the Lido there. Fiona and I, we go swimming every morning at 7 o'clock, and it was 9 degrees this morning, and it just makes you feel absolutely wonderful. That's a great way to start the day. Then we walk the dog, and then you've just got that sense of that green space. So please take a look at it, because there is a distinct and definite and proven link between nature and mental health and well-being. So that's the first thing I ask you to check out. And it's the Eden Project, and it's called the Festival of Discovery, and it's running now online. Second thing I want to advertise is just ask a question. And Jonny and I were talking about this, and Jonny will tell you it's quite a strange experience. But one of the most important things I think about looking after our own mental health and well-being, and it took me a long, long time to discover this, is actually being open about it. I think is the first big step. And that can be very difficult and quite scary in the workplace. So for a lot of people, it's who do you ask? Who do you go to when you think you might be struggling? A lot of people, you think in an ideal world, it'd be your family. But for a lot of people, for personal reasons, for cultural reasons, whatever it might be, for generational reasons, that can be very, very difficult. So jaaq.co.uk, please check it out. And those of you who think you might actually be wanting to get into this space as businesses, wanting to get involved, then we are looking for all sorts of people to get involved in that. But to be honest, just take a look to see how you might think it might help you or might help somebody you think struggling. And what it is, I'll just describe it very, very briefly. It's a new technology that we've adapted to. It's a JAAQ, stands for Just Ask a Question. You go on there, you put your email in, you say how old you are, you say where you're from, and then you're in. And so far we've recorded sessions on depression, which is me alongside one of the world's leading depression experts. Body dysmorphia alongside an expert, with somebody with lived experience alongside an expert, and then psychosis with the actor David Harewood, who's had experience of psychosis, alongside a psychiatrist, one of the world's leaders on psychosis. And we've spent thousands of hours recording answers to every conceivable question that you might want to ask. And Jonny will confirm when he comes back, I'm sure, it is like having a real conversation. There's about half a second gap while the algorithm digs deep, and it comes out with the answer that's closest to the question that you might have asked. Now, the reason why this is so important is because it's a way of people having a conversation without actually talking to anybody. And I think that could be a game changer, because for me, I've never, ever, ever regretted being open. But the thing is, I was lucky. I had no choice. I had a psychotic breakdown in the 80s up in Scotland, and I was arrested for my own safety. I was hospitalized, and I could only get my job back really on condition that I kind of understood I had to go and get quite a lot of help. So by the time I was through all that, everybody in my work environment knew. They all knew something had happened. They all knew I had to stop drinking. They all knew I'd been off work sick. Stuff got in. There was a little story in Private Eye about it. So people knew what had happened. And that just made me decide I'm just going to be open about it. And I've never, ever, ever, ever regretted that. However, once I was through that and back into the workplace and back recovering, I then shut down about the reasons. I said to myself, well, I've stopped drinking. I've really done the hard bit. But then the depressions kept coming, and I wasn't open about that at all. And it was probably only till, to be frank, that was in 1986. I only started being really open about what was going on inside my head in 2005, when I was self-harming. I was actually back on the heath. I was out walking with Fiona. We were having a bit of a bad time. We were rowing and arguing and all this stuff. And I started punching myself in the face really, really hard. I had black eyes. And Fiona was standing there watching this. And even as I was doing it, I was saying to myself, you can't do this anymore. You've got to get proper help. I was having this conversation inside my head while I was doing this crazy stuff. And that's the first time since 1986 I went actually and got professional help. And as a result of that, I think I'm in a lot better place than I used to be. I've got a psychiatrist. Funny enough, I bumped into him this morning and I see him now. I take medication every day. I see him when I feel really bad, but there's other stuff that I do that I'll come on to. And the next thing, so please check out jaaq.co.uk. I guarantee there'll be somebody in your life that you think will benefit. And we're now, by the way, we're now extending it to all the other conditions as well. The next thing I would say is, and this is a blatant and straight plug for that book, Living Better. But the reason why I do that is because this book contains everything that I've done to try to get my mental health in a better place. And you know, there's quite a lot of stuff in there. It's everything I've done with my psychiatrist. It's all the exercises that we do. It's all the kind of stuff. And the key to it, I'm going to very briefly, this is my next prop, my jam jar. I'm going to go, so when we talk about, you know, how do you cope with this kind of the pressure that we're under? I mean, I'm still a workaholic. I work flat out. I work every day. I don't really do holidays. And so I put myself under pressure, but how do you deal with it? So I'm just going to very briefly talk you through my jam jar. Because when I said earlier, I see a psychiatrist and I take medication. Before I found this jam jar, if you'd have said to me, how do you cope with your depression? I would have said, I take medication, I see a psychiatrist. Now, if you say to me, how do you cope with your depression? I say, I've got a jam jar and it really helps. So the jam jar, this was given to me by a lady in Canada who I interviewed for a TV program and for the book about how you deal with it. She said, she was a psychiatrist out in Canada. She said, down here at the bottom, you've got your genes. That's the sediment. Nothing you can do about it. The sediment is sticky. You can't get rid of it. It's down there in the bottom of the jam jar, okay? And no matter how strong your spoon is, you're not going to change it. Just live with it. And then the rest of your jam jar is your life. And we all have literally billions of experiences and sensations and thoughts and feelings. And they go in and they go out. And the vast majority, let's be honest, most of the stuff we do in our life, we forget it. It goes in, it goes out. I'm about to get on, after this call, I've got to get on a train. By tomorrow, I'll have forgotten that train journey. All the people that I see on there, I'll have forgotten. What I've thought about, I'll have forgotten, in the main. Some stuff stays in, okay? And stuff stays in, it's good and it's bad. If you've had a horrible, difficult childhood, as you know, Jonny has talked about his, then a lot of that stays in. If you had a happy childhood, that stays in. If you go through your teenage years, there's good and there's bad. Your student years, there's good and there's bad. Your professional life, there's good and the bad. The relationships, good and bad. And what she said to me is that most of the time, most of us are just about coping. We're just about managing. When we don't, it explodes and we get ill. And most of us spend a lot of time, the Freudians are down here digging into the kind of, you know, did you ever have thoughts about other? Here, they're the therapists. And by the way, I live in this street in Hampstead. Hampstead's got the highest proportion of therapists to head of population anywhere in Europe, okay? We've got 11 therapists in this street, let me tell you. Now, they're all in here saying, so they lie you down on a couch and they say, so what did you do last Tuesday night? How did that make you feel? And this lady, Janine Austin, she said, it's all fine, but it actually overlooks something more important. You can't undo any of it. What you can do is grow your jam jar. And I'm sitting there thinking, what the is she on about? But a few weeks later, just wait there. A few weeks later, I'm lying in bed in London and I woke up in the middle of the night, eureka moment, I've got it. I understand what she's talking about. And I went downstairs and please, this may be accidentally Freudianly phallic, and I'm sorry about that, but I drew my jam jar. You ready for my jam jar? That's my jam jar. And what it is, here's the sediment, there's life. And then I've added all the things that matter to me. And now when I'm going into a depression or I'm coming out of depression, I consciously think of this. I have it there right by me. I think of this. So number one, FFF, Fiona, family, friends. That in the end is what matters. If my relationship with Fiona is good, the kids are happy. If the kids are happy, I'm happy. Friendship, so important. So Fiona, family, friends. If I'm going into depression, first thing I do is I tell them all. I don't expect anything from them, but I just want them to know. MA, meaningful activity. And meaningful activity, I've got a dotted line because meaningful activity means work to make a living, have a nice house, have nice holidays. I want all that stuff. But it's also for me meaningful activity to change the world, right? Change the world on mental health. Stop Brexit. That went really, really well. Call out Boris Johnson every day of the week because, you know, I think he's a very, very bad man doing very, very bad things. So meaningful activity. The next is what I call the fundamentals: diet, sleep, exercise. I never used to take them seriously. Now I am absolutely obsessed about all three. After last night, as soon as the football was finished, bed. If the football hadn't been on, I'd have been in bed half an hour earlier. I've got to get decent sleep, and I never used to worry about that. Exercise. I was swimming at 7 o'clock. I'm going to do an exercise class later. I have to exercise. I have to keep fit because mental and physical fitness go together. And diet as well. I never used to, you know, when I was drinking, obviously I didn't care, but even about food, I didn't really care. Now, so diet, sleep, exercise, fundamental. Next one, BFC, Burnley Football Club. Next one, music. Here's something: when I'm stressed, I don't listen to the news, I listen to music. I don't read newspapers, I read books. Creativity, I have to write every day. Now that's me, right? Other people, it'll be something completely different, but I have to write every day. It keeps me on an even keel. Curiosity, do not go to bed without knowing something you didn't know when you woke up. And what's interesting, I've got my dog in here, I've got my bike in here, I've got Elvis Presley in here, I've got ABBA. Best thing that happened in the world in recent weeks is ABBA coming out with a new album. I've got my bagpipes, I've got my practice chanter, Johnny, get Hamish on the chanter soon. And I've now got David, my psychiatrist, and medication. They're not even in the top 15 in my jam jar. So that's just the way that, and that's something that I think we can all do. It's really about sort of pulling back and saying, okay, what can I do for myself and for others? And here's why this is so important. And Johnny talked about the importance of you guys and what you do in any organization. I was incredibly lucky with my employers. When I had my breakdown in the 1980s, one of the first phone calls I got was from a guy called Richard Stott, who'd been my previous boss at my previous employer. And he phoned me up and he said, I hear you've gone mad. And I said, well, I'm not well. I'm in hospital, as it happens, Richard. He said, okay, well, I told you not to leave here, didn't I? But anyway, listen to me. You're going to stay in that hospital until they tell you to go home. When you've rested and you feel you're nearly getting back to normal, you go back to that stupid newspaper I told you not to go to. You take the money a bit for there until you're 100% better, and then you come back here and you do your old job. Here's the thing, though, you're going to start at the bottom again. Now, that was the most wonderful moment for me because I thought, here's a guy who was angry with me because I left him and went to a rival newspaper, but he's telling me, I'm not defining you by what's happened to you. I'm not defining you by having had a nervous breakdown. I'm defining you by what I know you to be. And, you know, one of the reasons that I got involved in mental health campaigning in the first place, I had a brother, sadly now dead, Donald. He died when he was 62. He had schizophrenia. And he held down the same job at Glasgow University for 27 years. Why? Because they never defined him as a schizophrenic. They defined him as somebody of value to us who has schizophrenia. And when he stops taking his medication, he goes haywire. We have to deal with that. So never define people by their mental ill health. And a lot of you guys, when you hire people, if somebody comes along, they're open about their mental health and they're open about having had problems either now or in the past, just say to yourself, The normal reaction, the natural reaction is to say, oh, that's a problem. Your reaction, to my mind, should be, I like this guy. He's honest. He's lived a bit. And what do we want in employees? We want honesty. We want resilience. We want a bit of character. We want people who've done stuff. So I would say, go for that one rather than the one who's over there who's just got the kind of standard CV. And here's the other thing: within organizations, you guys are incredibly powerful. You're influential. You decide priorities. You decide where the money's going. You decide. You're the ones who can go to the bosses and say, hold on a minute, we're spending a lot on this. Maybe we should think about this. I want to tell you about an event I did recently with the Bank of Ireland. And the chief executive, it was an all-staff meeting with the Bank of Ireland. And the chief executive, Francesca McDonough, she started off the meeting by saying, we've asked Alice to speak today because we're going to talk about mental health and well-being. And from today, I want you to know, she said this is because of what she'd learned during COVID about the way the staff were reacting. From today, we are changing our strategic priorities. From today, our number one strategic priority is the mental health and well-being of our staff. Because without that, we are not going to have a happy, healthy organization. Without having a happy, healthy organization, we are not going to be successful. We're not going to meet the challenges that we face coming out of COVID, coming out of the global financial crisis, etc. And that was a wonderful moment for me because I thought, wow, that is the first time I've heard somebody right at the top of a major organization say mental health and well-being of our staff. So I would say to all of you, if the Bank of Ireland can do it, we can all do it. And you, within your organizations and your companies, you have a fundamental role to play in that. And I really hope that you play it, because I think this is the last great taboo. And I think it's the last great kind of frontier that we can take over. Massive progress in gay rights and women's equality and, racial equality. I mean, lots and lots of challenges still, but we've made massive progress. I still feel in this area that we're still in the foothills. And, without being too political, I don't trust this government on it. Well, I don't trust this government on anything, but I don't trust them on this because I don't think they get it. They don't talk about it. They don't address it. Theresa May at least talked the talk on it. Johnson doesn't even bother doing that. So that says to me, we don't do for ourselves, jam jars, and it's about what we can do for each other. And above all, I think it's about what we as employers and as leaders in companies and organizations, what we can do to, really to get things moving in the right direction. So that's what I want to do. That's why when I sit down with Jonny and talk about Starbucks and I meet a like mind, or, his wife Anissa, who's doing the same at Pladis, there's lots and lots of really good people in really good companies that can do stuff. But you know what? In the end, it is often about money. And what do you guys do? You control the purse strings. So as you're doing that, I just ask all of you, put this on your agenda, have it central to your agenda, and understand that is not a sort of touchy-feely corporate social responsibility. It's not about that. It's actually, yes, it is about that, but it's mainly about we're going to be better organizations if we really, really take this seriously and make it mean something. So don't just make it a sort of, box ticking exercise. Understand it's fundamental. You can't be effective. If I think about, I'll close on this before I go back to Jonny and then we do some questions. I remember not long ago, a few years ago now, and a guy at the Daily Telegraph wrote a profile about me, and they said, Alastair Campbell, who has had a successful life and career despite a history of mental ill health, Next time I saw the guy, I said, listen, I'm not complaining. It was a nice profile, blah, blah, blah. Thank you for writing about mental health. But the next time you write about me, just ask yourself the question, have I had a successful life and career despite a history of mental ill health, or in part because of? And I 100% believe it's the latter. Any strengths I have, any qualities that I bring to anything that I'm involved in, I think they come from here. They come from here. And I think that is warts and all. I have energy most of the time. If I'm depressed, I have no energy at all. I lie in bed, I can't get out. But when I'm coming out of those depressions, oh my God. I once wrote a novel in 9 days coming out of a depression. 9 days from start to finish. That was energy that I actually attribute to knowing about depression. If I've got the resilience I've got, people used to say to me, particularly when I was under the cosh and getting a lot of grief and protesters outside the house and all that, and people say, how do you cope with that? The answer is I cope with that by having something worse to compare it with. And the worst to compare it with is the depths of depression or psychotic attack, right? Once you've been through that, it's like, when I was psychotic in the 1980s, when I honestly thought I was going to die, I thought, here's the thing, I don't do God, but I thought I was being tested by God. And if I failed the test, I was going to be killed. That's what I thought. That was a real thought. So once you've survived that, even though it's kind of mad, it doesn't matter. Some guy in some sort of twat from the Daily Mail saying you're a war criminal, it doesn't really bother you. It would bother me if my mum said that or my kids said that, but some guy commenting online in his underpants in his mum's sitting room, it doesn't bother me. So that all comes from having all this mental health. So somebody says, please feel free to let Alastair keep talking as he's brilliant. Karen, I love Karen. I can read the comments here easy as they're coming in. So I'm going to stop though. I'm going to stop because I think we should, have a little bit of Q&A. But I hope I've given you enough there. So all this stuff. Yes, life is pressure. Yes, life is difficult. Yes, the health service isn't in the place we want it to be. Yes, the government is terrible. Yes, all the stuff that I can tell you. But there's a lot we can do for ourselves, and there's a lot we can do for each other, and there's a lot we can do as employers. And I'll now shut up and hand back to Jonny.
Thank you very much, Alastair. That's the last thing we want you to do is shut up. That's for sure. Wow. Do you know what? Right at the end there, you said something that's just totally stuck with me, and it's gonna hang with me all day, which is that it's not despite of, and it's an and actually, your point around if you've got 2 CVs, and then how do you take the real positives from somebody who might have had some type of mental ill health challenges. I just think that point about despite of, but actually it's because of, that is so.
Well, listen,
so
I know you reasonably well now, and I know your background, and I know your history, and I know you had a really, really, troubled childhood. And when I meet you, right, but I can see the qualities that you bring, and I think they come from that.
That's very kind of you to say, Alastair. Very kind of you to say. Coming from, you talk about, the Daily Mail person in their underpants in their bedroom. So, but coming from you, that means a huge amount. So I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you saying that, and the value that you've just brought to this community and this conversation is incredible. And I would second what Alastair said about JAAQ. I went on and I was asking Alastair some virtual questions, and it is just incredible. And what I also love about it is it takes also mental health into a different space, because it brings in a different type of technology, and it will probably attract, Gen Z and other type of, generations that might not typically engage in the subject as well. So I think it's just a fantastic website. So thank you so much. We've got some questions coming in, as you can imagine. And I think what we'll do is we'll hand over to Chris, first of all. Chris Wasso-Potro, who's got his first question for Alastair.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alastair, for the brilliant session. I have a question here around what is your best piece of advice for any individual on how to maintain our own well-being as we move towards a virtual workplace and world as well?
That's an interesting one, because I do think the whole COVID situation has been very, very interesting. I mainly work at home, okay, but I've got an office in town, and my office is actually inside a company that's got a couple of hundred people in there most of the time. And it was really interesting. Before lockdown, people like me and my generation would be saying to all the young people, no, having an office environment is so important. You've got to come into work and build the teamwork and team spirit and all that sort of stuff. And they were all sort of saying, this is ridiculous. I live in a crowded flat, and I've got to spend 40 minutes on the tube train, and I get in and I grab a coffee and I come in and then grab something at prep for lunch, and then I'll get back on for another horrible 40-minute journey. Most of the stuff I do here I could do at home. Okay, I was no, very important to come in. And there's been a kind of generational flip. My generation, it seems to me now, saying, oh, it's quite nice working at home, and you've got, you nip out to the garden and you can, walk the dog and nice area and blah, blah, blah. And the younger ones are saying, oh my God, I've got to get back to the office because I can't stand another day with my boyfriend in the next room and my wife in the next room. And, so I think it's changed. But I think that what I would say is that flexibility, I think, an understanding of flexibility. In fact, Jonny and I were talking about this in relation to Starbucks, and Jonny was saying that there seems to be an amazing amount of trust in his organization. People saying basically work like you want to work. Now that's going to be a massive, massive cultural leap for most bosses to take. But I think what I'd say is we've got to use the openness. Those people who actually have found, you know what, I found working from home really good, be open and honest about it. Those people who really struggled with it, and by the way, some people have, because they need the connection of other people. They don't like just sort of, I find myself, for example, if I've done more than 3 hours talking to the screen like this, I get really bad headaches, and 2, I get exhausted much more quickly than I normally do. Now, I think people just got to be open and honest and have those conversations. Use the emerging from COVID to have these conversations about what has worked for you as an individual, and the organization has the responsibility to say, well, how can we marry that to what we need to do as an organization? And I think actually that should create quite a kind of buzzy and quite energetic organizations. I think people have got to be trusted to work in the way that they want to work.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Alastair, for that question. And more questions coming in, as you can imagine. Over to Jason, who we actually saw earlier, who is our lead for the London area network. Over to you.
Thanks, Jonny. Hi, Alastair. Thanks for your presentation today. Really great. I recently heard you describe your framework for problem solving as OST, being objective, strategy, and tactics. I would just be interested to hear how you've used that framework with your own mental health journey, and how that sort of applied to you best delivering for yourself over time.
Yes, OST is a thing that I use for politics, for campaigns, for business, for whatever. I mean, and as you say, it's O for objective, S for strategy, T for tactics, and think in those terms. I would say, for example, my jam jar is a tactic. Okay, my objective is to be well. Okay, my objective is to be as well as I can be. And I would say that if I had to put one, I mean, if you've read my book on winners, you'll know that I think the best strategies, you should be able to define them as a word, a phrase, a sentence, a paragraph, a page, a speech, and a book. If I have a word for strategy, I think it's openness. I think my strategy is openness. I find that really helps me. And I love it. I really like it when people stop you in the street or come up to you in the train and say, look, thanks for being so open. It helps me. I like that, right? I'm not denying I like it. But I always say, well, I'm glad it helps you, but I've got to say it helps me as well. I think my openness is my strategy.
No, that's great. Thanks very much. I certainly found that framework a really interesting one to think about across the board, but particularly with regard to this. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Alastair. All right. So here's a question that we hear a lot, and you no doubt have come across this, I guess, concern or question that people have is around working from home and the balance and the blurred lines that we then get. Can you share any effective strategies about how you managed those pressures of blurred lines and work-life balance, and then particularly in your role as press secretary when you were on call 24/7?
Well, the honest short answer is I didn't manage them very well. And the reason for that is there were no boundaries. And I did that. I've had amazing, you know, I'll do a lot of podcasts, but I'll tell you one that has had, I can't believe how many people have listened to it and mentioned it, is the Jake Humphrey's High Performance podcast. I don't know if you're aware of that, but honestly, it's just been, of all the podcasts I've done, I think I've had more feedback from that. And one of the things I said on that was that if we're being absolutely honest, as I try to be, I think we kid ourselves that we can do really full-on jobs, where, as you say, you're under pressure 24 hours a day, you never stop, and be a good partner, husband, wife, partner, father, mother, son. It's funny, just as I'm talking to you, I'm looking there. There's a picture of Fiona there. There's a picture of me, Fiona, and the kids there. There's a picture of my mum and dad there. Now, the honest answer is I tried my best, okay? But I know it wasn't good enough. And, but here's the thing. Doing that job that I was doing then and being the personality I have, I don't think I could have done it any differently. So that's a bad message in some ways. Because if I look at the current government, or look at the current Labour Party, to be honest, I sort of worry there aren't people who are doing it like that. So I guess, you know, that's why I said on that podcast, I think there are some jobs. I can remember once walking out of the house, having just had a terrible row with Fiona because I was going to Northern Ireland again, right? You know, it was like virtually every weekend there was one, but I seemed to be going to Northern Ireland like every weekend. And I remember walking down the road. I hope she's not watching this. I'm walking down the road and saying to myself, right, I've just got to put that out of my mind. I cannot let that hang over me for the rest of the day and the rest of the weekend. And it was almost like a mental trick that I played on myself. I was able to put it out of my mind. And I didn't always put it out of my mind, but I felt so. This is a bad answer to a good question, but I'm just being absolutely brutally honest with you. I don't. You're asking the wrong person about work-life balance. I've got it now, right? But my kids are in the 20s and 30s. You know, and I talk in the podcast about I've got a son, Callum, who's a recovering alcoholic. Now, he might have been an alcoholic anyway, but you know, there's not a day goes by I don't think, well, is that because we weren't around enough, you know, when I was literally working around the clock.
And that's an honest answer, you know, and you spoke about openness, and I personally just love and appreciate your openness in that answer, and I've certainly taken a few things away from that. And I guess the question then is, how do you have that conversation with an employer? Because that's a theme that's coming through is, you know, if your line manager doesn't want to hear it, or how do you approach even having that type of conversation with your? Well,
to be fair, I remember once Fiona went to. Well, here's a story about in relation to Fiona. She's written a chapter in the book, which is why this is kind of quite fresh in the minds and quite raw. She wrote a chapter about what it's like living with me with my depression. When I was cracking up in the 1980s, she went to see my then boss, who was a newspaper editor. And she said, listen, I think Alastair's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And he basically, she says in the book, he belittled her, he made her feel small, which of course is what I did as well. Because she'd say to me, I'm really worried about it. You'd say, oh, leave me alone. You're the one, stop nagging me. I'm fine. I've got to do like this. And people do that as well. To be fair to Tony Blair, she went to see him at points as well, and and he would say, look, I know that, and I try and say that as well. That's his personality. And now, to be fair, I think Jonny, I'm not saying this critically, but he exploited that as well. He knew that I had this phenomenal energy, and I wouldn't let go, and that was useful to him most of the time. But I think you have to. Here's the thing. I think if you talk to people who work for me, as opposed to me, I would say to people, you need to take time off. I would say, and I used to say to people, this is very difficult. And there's a guy who worked for me, Martin Sheehan, he said, look, you know, you got to be a bit more subtle about this. Because I used to say to people, just because I work around the clock, I don't expect you to. Right? But the truth is, they did, a lot of them, feel maybe under pressure to work very, very hard. But I did used to go around. I'd go around the office. I was first in, last out. And I would say to people, look, just because I'm still here, you don't need to be here. Go home. Right? So I don't know. Listen, you're asking the wrong person here, Jonny. I don't know is the answer. You need to find people who actually are really good at this, as opposed to people who set a bad example.
Yeah, but you know, but it's not easy though in different professions. Even in the accounting profession, I remember when I was training at KPMG, there was a real thing around presenteeism. If you didn't leave the office before 6, or if you left the office before 6 or 7, and you were the person not there, then you felt like it was frowned upon, or you felt there's a culture around it. And that wasn't a KPMG thing. It was just the nature of, I think, the profession at the time, and hopefully things are moving.
But that's why what you said to me last week about Starbucks, I think so much of this is about leadership. It's about leaders at all level of the organization, not just saying, as I used to say, you know, you can go home whenever you want, but actually you got to do a little bit of show, not tell. So I think I was a very good example in many ways, and most of the people who worked for me, I think, enjoyed it and were quite inspired by it and all that. But I think what I was good at was that side. What I was less good at was you were telling me the thing about turning your phone off and not receiving emails and all that sort of stuff. That sort of stuff brings me out in a cold sweat. I mean, I'll be honest about that. And you know, so I think it's an educational thing, but it's going to take leadership, probably of your generation rather than mine.
And that takes us nicely on to the next question, which is about generation, actually, from James around, do you think there's a difference in how mental health is perceived across the different generations?
Yeah, I do. I think if I look at my kids, well, maybe certainly if I look at my daughter Grace, she's so open. She's had really bad anxiety. When I hear her and her friends talking, not just about this, but about everything, I just think, oh my God, you know, I wonder if things would have been different if I'd have felt that we could have been as open as in our generation. So I definitely think it's changing. And I think also that the kind of her generation, I think they are creating pressure on employers that even the employers are having to respond to. You know, when you're talking about a jobs market that is, you know, quite competitive, I'm amazed about how, you know, when you interview people these days, it's almost like they come in and say, well, this is what I want. It's like, and I like that. I like that. I think that's creating cultural change within workplaces in a way that is good. So yeah, I do think there's a generational change, and I hope that part of that is because there is this greater openness than there was. I mean, I think, you know, maybe it's also my kids because they've grown up in this family, but I think they find it weird that, you know, when I say to them things like, "Oh yeah, you never used to be able to talk about this," you know, they just find that as weird. But here's the thing: I can remember. I mean, cultural change is so interesting. I remember my mum when I was about 7. My mum sat us all down at the table, myself, my brothers, and my sister, and sat us down and said, "Mr. Whitaker next door got some bad news. He's got cancer. You mustn't tell anybody." That was the norm. You didn't talk about cancer. Well, that's gone, right? And there is, as a result of that going, cancer care is better. And I feel the same with mental health, that if we can just get rid of the stigma, it will open it up so that, people won't tolerate what we have to tolerate now. You imagine if you broke your leg and you couldn't get treatment in London, you had to go to Newcastle, right? Imagine that. Well, we have that in mental health care now, right? Where kids in particular, because CAM's in such a mess, kids are being sent from Plymouth to Edinburgh because that's the only place they could find the bed that night. I mean, it's just, we wouldn't tolerate that, but we do tolerate it because it's mental health.
Yeah, and hopefully over time we'll see some of that shift move and get real parity. But to your point, we're quite some time away from that. I think. But hopefully conversations though is the good starting point. You talked there about you talking more with your kids. I remember when I was 13, sat very alone in my bedroom. Nobody was around to say, let's talk. You didn't even talk about it. It wasn't even a conversation that you had. And I do think now, well, I'd like to think now people would talk to that young person, or that young person might feel more confident in talking, because mental health is just now much more part of the narrative. Do you think that kids growing up stand a better chance to be able to talk about their mental health now, and what more can we do to encourage that with young people?
I think they do, but then one of the worries I have about the current state of the debate is that we're all talking about it, but then I worry that because the services aren't necessarily there to meet the need, that for some people they end up in a worse situation where they're being open. So let's you just take somebody who's open, and as a result of that gets ostracized within the family, loses their job. That still goes on. There is still discrimination in families and in the workplace on the grounds of mental health. So I sort of feel that there's a danger that if the openness battle being won, unless the services alongside are there, it could become a bit of a problem. But back to my point, is why employers are so important. Employers, I think, are as important in this space as government. That's where the openness has to be, because that is where people can feel that it's not going to be held against them. But I get people writing to me the whole time saying, I did what you said, and I went and I was open, and I've lost my job as a result. It's terrible. No, and all I can do is put them in touch with lawyers. But that it's not happening. I'm not saying it's a massive thing, but it's happened. That does happen.
Yeah, I think that is one thing for employers though, because as businesses and organizations start to talk more about mental health and well-being, it's what are the underlying support tools, so they can raise the conversation up, they can have a tone from the top. But then, for folk on the call, it's thinking about, well, what tools are in place in your organization in terms of things like employee assistance programs, mental health first aiders, training for line managers, plus loads of other prevention tools in place, because there's no point talking about it if you can't then support what might come off the back.
I'll tell you, you mentioned their mental health first aid. That is something I would recommend to everybody. It's just so, when I was growing up and first aid became a thing, and that was about physical first aid. How do you help somebody who's choking? How do you help somebody who's fallen over, broken the leg? Would you, all that stuff. We all did that, right? At school. I think we did that at school, didn't we? But I think mental health first aid is and actually it's really interesting. It's really, really interesting. It only takes a couple of days. And I had an experience on the tube the other day where what happened was I was on the tube, quite crowded. And I think the tubes are pretty stressful at the moment as already, because of there's extra stress because of the whole mask debate, and some people are wearing masks, some people aren't. And I mean, I for one I get really pissed off with the people who are not wearing masks, and you feel the tension right there. Anyway, I'm sitting next to this woman who is wearing a mask. But I think because I've had experience of this myself, but also because I've, had the first aid thing as well. And the reason was train stopped suddenly in between stations, right? And that's quite a common thing, to panic in that. So anyway, I just started talking to her, and I could sense that everybody else around us as well. And she was having trouble breathing. I could just tell she was having a panic attack. And so I just started talking to her, and then I told her this little technique that I have and I said, look, I get sort of panic attacks sometimes, and here's the thing that I do. And I told her this thing that I do, which I learned from a guy. I learned this from a golf coach who was coaching somebody who got the yips, couldn't complete a putt. And it's this centering thing, and I just rub my thumbs and my forefingers together like that. And I said, look, this might help. This is what I do. And I do this. Anyway, she just sat there breathing and doing this. And look, she might have calmed down anyway, but just slowly over time, she calmed down. And then while other people noticed, because people basically are nice, while other people noticed that this was going on, right? A couple of people came over, had a bottle of water. Would you like my water? And it became a little kind of community thing going on with this. And then, of course, she, then she got terribly embarrassed and et cetera, et cetera. But it was just sort of, I just felt that was, I think a lot of people would have panicked at the fact that she was having a panic attack. Whereas if you do a bit of mental health first aid, you kind of, know what to do.
I think that's a really good advice for all of us, and I can second that, having sat on the content of that. I'm just looking. There's a few questions coming in Q&A, so maybe we could do these quick fire to get through them before the time with everyone. And there's some really good questions. I'm going to just touch on one here, which is around career changes. So I recently changed my career as a result of it damaging my mental health. The person was in a traditional CA role, chartered accountant role, and then moved into TV production. What advice would you give to people who have made that career change due to their mental health, and how would you speak about that event, I guess, with confidence or without stigma, if you're talking to future employers about why you've had to make the career change?
You see, that is tricky. That is tricky. My answer would be loud and proud. I learned a lot, and this is how I'm now going to apply it to this. That's what I'd say in that. But it will. That so much of that will depend on the new employer and the people around them. But listen, I always say to people, I think it's unfair of me, without even knowing the person and their background and what they do, it's unfair of me to say, listen, you owe it to the world to be open. But all I can say is I have never, ever, ever regretted. And I think most people, provided they can sense the sort of authenticity in the person, I think most fair-minded people will go with that. Will go with that narrative. Some won't, but we're just got to be honest about that. Some won't. But I'd say be open, own the story.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And to your point as well, knowing the context as well is important of who you're then telling it to. I think we've then got time for one final question, which is about from Lucy about routine. What role do you feel that having routine has in supporting your mental health, particularly in a crisis time that we're being through with COVID? So the importance of routine in your mental health.
I mean, I would argue that my jam jar is a form of routine, in that it's the things that I know I have to keep attached to. And look, I'm a believer in routine, in that, I mentioned the thing about, so if we're in London, swimming every morning at 7 o'clock, that's routine. Walking the dog is routine. I think that, but at the same time, I get one of my big problems in life is I get very easily bored, and so therefore I think maybe I would think of it less as routine than structure. I think you need structure, But then within the structure, you need the ability to adapt and, you know, go off in different directions, but within that structure. And so, you know, let's be honest, for most people, particularly if we are employed as opposed to self-employed, for most people, structure will come in the main through where you live and who you live with, and where you work and who you work with, and how you work. Now, so I think it's building, rather than thinking it's routine, I have to do the same thing at the same time every day, every week. Think of the structure and build that into a really powerful thing that you like to be in. So that's why, in the end, why ultimately the most important thing in our lives is, you know, the who we live with and who, because that's where we spend all our time. So I'd say work on them rather than worry about whether you're doing the same thing at the same time every day.
Love that. What a great place to end, Alastair, on really going away thinking about the structure that we have. So just bringing us to a close then. What a great conversation, and just so encouraging that we continue to talk about our mental health and well-being. I hope you found today's event useful and give you something new to take away and think about. I've certainly taken a whole page of notes, so got lots in there. Great to chat. If you want to reach out to me personally, you can find me on LinkedIn, and obviously Alastair across the various forums that he operates across. And the London area network is obviously a great way to connect with fellow CAs in the city. So please get in touch with ICAS if you want to be involved in the network. And you saw Jason talk a bit about that earlier on. So this was part of the hashtag the London episode. Like I say, feel free to do any social media. And in 2 weeks' time, there is another incredible speaker coming up, Ruxana Baiji, who is the inclusive leader championing ED&I and building a real culture of inclusion in one of the world's most diverse hubs. And you can sign up for that event on the ICAS website, and you can enjoy that too. But we are at time. So thank you very much, everybody. What an incredible, incredible discussion this morning. Thank you.
See you, Johnny.
See you later.